In the news this week, Christian relief agencies on the ground after deadly earthquake. Churches respond to South Africa's xenophobic attacks. And Hillsong Church prepares to take on music pirates.
This is InFocus Christian News and Current Affairs.
Hello, thanks so much for joining us for this week's edition of Record in Focus. I'm Ken Kingston, and poised for action at the news desk is Sabel Coutet.
Posture? It's a big week on InFocus this week, I understand.
Yes, James Standish is in for Freedom in Focus. I'll be chatting with Trafford Fisher about men and their relatives. And historian David Tremont will be helping us make sense of the claim, often heard these days, that religion is responsible for many of the world's wars.
Right. Well, unfortunately, this week's news bulletin has its share of religious violence. But it's good to step back now and again and take in the wider view.
Well, let's do the news then.
Thanks, Kent. Christian aid agencies are providing vital assistance after Nepal's devastating earthquake, which killed around 2,500 people and seriously affected millions. Nepal is one of the world's poorest countries and hosts a significant number of international aid organisations, which have now swung into action, even as they assess the impact of the disaster on their staff and programmes.
ADRA staff are accounted for and are safe. However, they have been traumatised by the earthquake, as you can imagine. ADRA is planning to respond in shelter to provide shelter needs for those who have been left outside in the cold now. Most people are sleeping outside because they're scared of more aftershocks destroying buildings that could be still standing currently. ADRA is working in coordination with other organisations in Nepal. They are a part of some of the UN initial assessments that are being conducted, not just in Kathmandu, but also in surrounding districts.
In two shocking copycat attacks, about 30 Ethiopian Christians have been massacred in Libya by Islamic State militants. According to Christian Solidarity Worldwide, an IS video shows two groups of men being killed, one by shooting and the other by beheading. The video explicitly identifies the victims as worshippers of the cross and refers to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church as hostile. In an official statement, the church described the killings as unnecessary and unjustifiable and far too familiar. Church leaders have spoken out against attacks on foreign nationals in South Africa and provided practical assistance to those affected by the violence. Thousands of migrant workers from neighbouring countries have fled their homes after attacks that killed 7 people. Aid agencies operated by the Seventh-day Adventist Church have been providing daily meals for more than 1,500 displaced people. Church leaders said the violence and prejudice has brought shame to the nation of South Africa. After what some described as New South Wales' worst storms in living memory, church volunteers and charity organisations have pitched in to help with the clean-up. The Adventist Development and Relief Agency assisted at 5 evacuation centres in the Hunter region and Sydney and organised emergency accommodation for those unable to return home.
Disasters bring out the best, and they unfortunately bring out other sides, but certainly it's an opportunity for people to help other people. And yes, we've called on people who haven't volunteered for ADRA, but they're part of our faith community, and they've been willing to help, willing to actually even go to the venues to ask, the motels to ask if they've got accommodation, because all the power's out. So people have been really good in the community to assist and to help out.
Hillsong Church has welcomed planned laws that will block pirate music websites. According to 9 News, Hillsong United is believed to be one of Australia's most pirated bands. Hillsong says this is disappointing, especially considering that Christians are their biggest market. The church says it supports proposed laws under which courts can require internet service providers to block pirate websites. Australian Christian groups have called for 7 days of worldwide prayer and fasting for a nation they say is hanging in the balance, the United States. The 7-day period began on the 30th of April, the 152nd anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's day of humiliation, prayer and fasting during America's Civil War.
So, Father, we join with Abraham Lincoln and those signers of the American Declaration of Independence, and we declare that Jesus Christ is Lord of America. We declare that this nation has a future in God. And we cry out now that you'll turn this nation around. We thank you for the President, that you would bless him. We thank you for the Congress, that you'd bless the Congress.
The organisers of the 7 days of prayer and fasting say they're looking for believers from 100 nations to join them. As Greece's economy hangs in the balance, the National Church says it wants to help. According to Reuters, the Greek Orthodox Church is the country's largest private landowner, with holdings even in prime real estate locations in Athens. Church leaders say they're willing to cooperate with the government in developing some of their land, with the profits going to offset the nation's spiralling debts. In the past, critics have suggested the Greek Orthodox Church gets too many tax breaks and favours from the government. The battle against sorcery-related violence is continuing in Papua New Guinea, with church leaders struggling to make headway against deeply entrenched practices. According to The Guardian, recent deaths in PNG's highlands are widely believed to be the results of witchcraft. 4 people accused of placing the curses have been interrogated and tortured in connection with the deaths, and may now be in danger of being killed themselves. Local church leaders are doing what they can to defuse the situation. And still in PNG, a former gang leader is doing what he can to bring peace to his region of Popondetta in the country's east. Sam Oivo left his life of crime behind when he accepted Jesus and was baptized in a local Seventh-day Adventist church. But rather than turning his back on his old associates, Sam has used his influence to bring together representatives of 3 rival gangs to broker a peace deal between them. His new church family participated in the reconciliation meeting by providing refreshments to all who attended. And that's this week's news. Over to you, Kent.
Thanks, Sibel. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment with Freedom in Focus.
Every week, It Is Written is available to millions of free-to-air viewers throughout Australia, New Zealand, New Guinea and the Pacific. It Is Written's Gary Kent regularly takes viewers to the far corners of the globe to report on new evidence and discoveries that confirm the Bible and Christian beliefs. It Is Written also provides medical care to remote Pacific Island communities. Join Gary Kent each week for It Is Written. See television guides and the It Is Written website for broadcast times. It Is Written with Gary Kent. It really is television that changes lives.
Hello, welcome back. Well, the West African nation of Liberia is well on its way to declaring itself a Christian nation. Should we celebrate this, James Standish?
Well, it's great to be back, Kent. First of all, spiffy hairdo, I got to say.
Wow.
Very spiffy. And I think, you know, you're setting a standard here.
Possibly modelled off yours.
Well, I don't know. Mine's cut very short right at the back. But look, Liberia is an interesting country. It's a country that's gone through tremendous hardship. I actually handled a couple asylum cases from Liberians when I worked as a lawyer in the U.S. And they're obviously in the rebuilding phase. They've come up with this idea as part of the rebuilding or saying who they are as a nation. They want to call themselves a Christian nation. I'm not very fond of these ideas of naming nations after religions. We're an Islamic state or we're a Christian state.
A secular state, even some nations have done that.
I'm not really that keen even on calling yourself a secular state. And I'll tell you why, Ken. Every country on earth, virtually, you might be able, maybe the Vatican's the exception, but nearly everyone has a diverse population.
Yep.
And so when you say we are a Christian state, and there are people who are Muslim or animist or atheists, well, how does that make you feel? It makes you feel like you're a second-class citizen.
Well,
in your
in
own country.
Liberia, the Muslim population there is certainly saying we're feeling marginalised by this.
Which I think is a natural thing. Now, of course, what the Christians would say back, or some Christians might say, well, you guys are very opposed to having a Christian nation, but look how many states, like, for example, Iran, the Islamic Republic, or Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, all these countries that have done it. But the point is this, nearly every country that's gone down that route, who wants to live there? I mean, there's a reason why people are getting on boats and risking their lives to get away from many of these so-called Islamic, states.
Okay, well, let's take your data about this a little further, James. Yeah. In a country like Australia, we have prayers in Parliament.
Sure.
In
the US too.
Yeah, there's a Christian infrastructure sort of built into some of our forms of government and things like that. Is that something we should perhaps look at, maybe reducing the amount of religion there and being a little more neutral?
It's a good question. I think that when you end up in a situation where particular religions are marginalized from the public square, I think you do have a problem. And I think one of the things that the U.S. has done a very good job of is to say, yeah, we have a prayer. Most of the time it's Christian. Most of us are Christians. But we also have imams come in. We also have rabbis come in and so forth. So you get that diversity. I don't think that you should scrub the public square of religion. We are religious people. We have a religious background. It does infuse our culture. There's no reason why we can't reflect that. But what we shouldn't do, we should reflect the diversity of our religious views, not no triumphalism. You know, my dad used to say this. He had a comment. If you have to put a descriptor in front of your country, it's probably because you're not what you say you are. For example, think of all the countries that call themselves democratic or People's Republic of. They're the least democratic. And yet the democracies, you don't say the democracy of Australia, it just is. And I think the same thing with countries. If you are a predominantly Christian country, people will see that and they'll know it. If you're not saying it, it's not going to make it so.
Boy, and so I guess the challenge then is for us, living in a Christian majority country as Australia is, barely, I guess, what can we do to infuse a Christian ethic in our nation? Not in a dominating, taking over everyone else's way, but in, I guess, Jesus' way, sort of from the underneath. Some interesting insights there. Thanks so much for your time this week, James.
Well, thanks so much, Kenton. If I can get the name of your barber, get along there.
Thanks. All right, we'll be back straight after the break.
Signs of the Times, a magazine for a world on the brink. And this month in Signs, the Bible and its potential for problems and misunderstandings. Why being a parent gives you an advantage at work. Establishing boundaries without appearing to be selfish. Eliminating impediments to prayer and more. All in this month's Signs of the Times. Subscribe to Signs today and change your life.
Travel back in time to ancient civilizations with Archaeological Diggings digital magazine. This month, Diggings looks at the Shroud of Turin, one of the most studied artefacts in history. But is it really Jesus as claimed? We explore how ancient Egyptians not just adored, but literally worshipped their pets. And we also bring you the latest news from the fascinating world of archaeology. Don't miss an issue. Subscribe online or ask for Archaeological Diggings at your local newsagent.
Hi, it's great to be back, and it's great to have our family life educator Trafford Fisher back in the studio.
Thank you, Ken. Good to be here.
Yeah, great. Now, men and relatives. When I think about men and relatives, I think about the in-laws, and men generally have a bit of a strained relationship with their in-laws.
And that's why a recent study out of Britain intrigued me, Ken.
Yeah.
The article reported on some research, and I have to be honest, I couldn't find the original research, but the article suggested that men reported having a higher sense of self if they had a close connection with relatives.
Right.
But the same didn't occur for women.
Wow.
So in other words, it seems as if men got a higher sense of self when they had a close connection with relatives, but the women didn't. And
is that maybe because women are better at forming friendship groups and so aren't so dependent on the family?
The study was frustrating. It didn't tell me.
Didn't tell you why?
It didn't tell me why. So it wasn't sort of a causative thing. It was just simply saying, hey, this is what they found. And I was intrigued by that, and I thought I should talk to my friend Kent about that. Maybe together we can nut it out. It sounds as if it's about identity and attachment. Generally, we understand women do relationships, generally speaking, a little more easily than men. They're warm, they're nurturing, they're caring. Men, as you suggested, whatever, we sort of give or take. But when it comes to mateship in the Australian psyche, that's generally a thing we connect with men.
Okay.
Men have mates. close mates.
But according to this research, it's relatives. And
yes.
And I mean, look, let's look at the very scientific measure of action movies, okay? How many action movies do you know that at their core are actually about men reconciling with their brother or reconciling with their father?
Yeah.
We see this theme coming out over and over again, and it seems to resonate very deeply for men.
I think there's something about sustaining a connection of some kind that's vital for men within their family. You're right, and I think that touches the theme. The movies about Anzac and all the rest. It's often about that familial thing. The brother and I did this, so my brother and I, my father. So there's something there. What I'm intrigued in is exactly what it is. Why may that not be true for women? So this needs some more research, some more work. But I raise it as an interesting thing, and I think it does spark us to say we need to try and get a handle. What might this mean? Why might it be so valuable and important?
Yeah. And I guess certainly for men who are perhaps estranged from their families in some ways, just to realise, hey guys, this is actually something pretty vital, pretty central to your identity, and maybe it's time you sorted it out if you can.
It's time to do some work here. I'm at risk while I sustain this distance from my family. Well, I don't care, I think is a risk statement.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's an interesting study. We need to do some more work. I think it is about this identity and connection and attachment that's very important.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Food for thought, Trafford. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. We'll be back straight after the break.
Discover some of these artists from Salter Music. Anna Weatherup.
Oh, people get ready for the train to Jordan.
Castles in Air.
Like watchmen wait for the morning light.
Eric and Monique.
You alone are my strength, my refuge.
Sapphire.
His love reached the bottom of the ocean.
No matter what shade of musical taste you have, you might just find something that sings to you. It's all waiting to be discovered at saltermusic.com. Fresh and exciting original Christian music from Salter Music.
Unearth ancient civilizations with archaeological diggings. This bi-monthly magazine will keep you up to date with news and insights from the fascinating world of archaeology. Subscribe online or ask for archaeological diggings at your newsagent.
Hi, welcome back. Well, it's great to have with me in the studio again Dr. David Tremont.
Pleasure to be with you, Kent. Thanks for having me back.
Based in America, but an Aussie boy from way back.
Yes, grew up in Sydney as a child.
Well, there you go. Well, welcome back.
Thank you.
Welcome home. Now, you're an historian by passion, aren't you? Not by trade necessarily, but by passion. Is that right?
Well, I was an academic historian for 13 years. Now I work for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, directing their archives. But so professionally, I was and consider myself as still an historian. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Wow. A question that's being thrown around a lot these days, and we hear accusations coming through all the time, is that religion is the cause of all the world's troubles, and in particular the world's wars. Now, this has been an area of research for you. What would you say to that accusation?
Well, firstly, it's clearly not the cause of all the world's troubles. And indeed, even in the relatively recent past, the greatest and most destructive wars in human histories were the wars created by overtly secular ideologies, inspired actually by Darwinian evolution, it has to be said, which is
such as
Nazism, which is overtly Darwinian in its whole attitude to life. Not to mention Bolshevik communism of the Soviet Union, which is shaped by that kind of thinking and was overtly atheistic. These wars caused by these great secular ideologies, fascism, communism, have resulted in hundreds of millions of deaths across the century.
And this is even before you get to Pol Pot, before you get to China.
Indeed. So we have to say religion isn't the sole cause, and then also one doesn't have to be overtly cynical or a member of the Occupy Wall Street movement to be able to see that big business and especially oil has driven a fair amount of recent conflict.
True. So capitalism is also a cause of war, you could say?
And has been. Trade has driven war for several centuries.
But is religion innocent? I mean,
no. All that said, religion is definitely not innocent, and Christianity is not innocent. The truth is, and I think Christians have to accept this, historically, Christians have waged religious war, and they have been driven to violent excesses.
Have Christians really waged religious war, or have they waged political war and used religion as a motivating factor to sort of bring the troops on board?
They've done both, and very often, of course, there are geopolitical factors, the ambition of sovereigns and states, and then religion is the rhetoric used to cover it. But one has to say, especially in the century and a half after the Reformation, but also at points in the early Middle Ages, people made war for overtly religious reasons. They weren't just adopting this rhetoric. They weren't being manipulated into it by cunning politicians who weren't truly Christians. People felt it was their Christian duty to kill other people, and they did it.
You mentioned the early Middle Ages. Would the Crusades fall into that
I'm thinking of the
Crusades.
Crusades. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The Crusades fall into that.
Because the Crusades, I mean, people throw around the word Crusades like they throw around the word, Nazism and Jewish Holocaust. But
most people don't actually...
As a byword, what was it actually about and what happened?
Most people don't understand with the Crusades. But the Crusades actually emerged because the Holy Land, the land where Christ walked and was crucified and rose again, was occupied by Muslims. Now, today, I don't think we'd have so much of a problem with that.
Well, it almost is.
Well, it is. So nobody has a problem with it. Nobody's saying we should wage war to get rid of it, to reoccupy it. The early medieval mindset had a different attitude. For them, it was unacceptable that Christians could not go on pilgrimage. Pilgrimage was a very important part of Catholic religion in the process of being saved. And so they thought that people could not go on pilgrimage to those holy sites.
To Jerusalem, for example.
To Jerusalem and Bethlehem and Nazareth was outrageous. And even the thought, though, that pagans were, as they thought of them, were occupying this land, that alone was seen as unacceptable. And so people said, well, we have to defend Christendom by driving out Muslims. Yes. And so now, very quickly, those wars became about the commercial ambitions of empires such as Venice and Genoa, and political factors came in. But we know that a lot of people went on crusade because they felt that doing so was fulfilling what God wanted and would put them in a state of grace.
What I find interesting is that alongside that history, you also have Francis of Assisi, who makes his pilgrimage all the way to the to the leader of the Muslim armies, and has dialogue and seems to show a different way of
Indeed,
of
and
peace.
Francis of Assisi, of course, interestingly, does go on one of the Crusades, and then has a conversion experience and says, "No, I shouldn't be a soldier. I should be a monk. I should devote myself to Christ and to good works."
So this sort of points to another Christian tradition, doesn't it? I mean, you mentioned after the Reformation, that sort of pacifist tradition came out, as well as sort of the Lutherans in Calvin's Geneva and all the violence against the Anabaptist and all that sort of stuff.
That's true. The Reformation actually gives rise to 150 years of religious war, not only between Protestant and Catholic, but also between Christian, both Protestant and Catholic, against Muslims, but also between different types of Protestants. Everybody persecuted and killed everybody else, would be the simple way of putting it. But at the same time, you do have a nobler tradition. You do have people saying it is wrong for a Christian to kill. And so one of the teachings of many early Protestants, for example, is that it is never legitimate to take up arms against the sovereign, against your state. Your choice, that doesn't mean that when you should give up your principles, that you should engage in false worship as they saw it, but your choice is either to be true to the gospel or to be martyred. There's no middle ground. Now that's a hard call to make, and I'm glad I personally don't have to make it, but that was their teaching. And you also have groups such as the Moravians, the Mennonites, and others, some of the Anabaptists, who say it's never legitimate to take up the sword, it's never legitimate to take a life. And that's a very noble tradition. So that's in Christianity as well, and it's important to recognise that there are both streams.
Well, let's fast forward to today, because it's all very interesting to look at history and argue about it. And, Obama brought up the Crusades the other day. But this martyrdom, for example, we had 21 Egyptian Christians martyred in Libya for their faith just several weeks ago. So we take these traditions and this history. Let's fast forward to today. How do we make sense of what's going on today? The violence that we see today, some is religiously based.
Absolutely.
Some is not, obviously. how do we make sense of it? Is there a right way to proceed from looking at these traditions and lessons from history?
One way of looking at it would be to say there is what's in Christianity is what's called the just war tradition, and some might feel actually that defending other Christians who are being persecuted would be right and proper and legitimate. Even
just Christians or anyone innocent who's being persecuted?
Well, I think it would be up to the person. I personally would say anyone who's being persecuted, it is legitimate to defend them, but we have to recognise that war is a terrible thing, and whenever you engage in war, for the noblest of reasons, it ends up dragging you down. But another attitude is, for many of us, we're never going to be in a position realistically where we face persecution, but we can persecute others. Even in a place like Australia where the law, gives us so many freedoms, but we have the opportunity to be oppressive of other people just by our attitudes. And it's very tempting, I think, at the moment, especially to take that attitude towards Muslims because of what's happening in the Middle East. Most Muslims are peace-loving people. They love God as they understand him, and they value the family. They have values that Christians would often sympathise with.
Much more than the average secularist.
Much more than the average secular person, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think we need to go back to the principles of Jesus, turn the other cheek, love those around us, and not be drawn into suspicion, oppression and repression because of what somebody who has a similar religious view thousands of miles away is doing. We should take people as we find them. We should love them. We should follow Jesus' commands.
Wow. So Jesus said, love your enemies. It was radical then.
It's radical now.
Wow. Hey, thanks so much for your time today, Dr. David Trim. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ken.
We'll be back straight after the break.
Planning your future can be a daunting task. What you want to do, who you want to be, and the road ahead can often be unpredictable. No one really knows what the future holds. That's just part of what makes it all so amazing. And that's why a great education matters. Because it doesn't just help you get a great job. It helps you prepare for what life can throw at you and live a great life. Avondale. It's education designed for life.
Thousands of years ago, a series of ancient prophecies were disguised within a system of mysterious symbols. For centuries, these remarkable predictions have been sealed to the world until now. Check out our new Secrets of Prophecy online course today in 24 beautifully illustrated free studies at www.itiswrittenoceania.tv or call 1300 300 389 for your free copy today.
Hello, welcome back.
If you missed any of today's episode or something from a previous week, each segment of the program is available online for you to watch, share or download.
And our website is of course record.net.au. There's plenty of inspiration, information and irritation to be had there.
Not too much irritation, I hope?
No, not too much, just enough to keep things interesting. Hey, thanks for your company this week. God willing, we'll see you next time on Record in Focus.
Catch you then.
Bye.